True horror stories. The horror story of the Enfield Monster Mystery. One night in 1973, the two young children of the McDaniels of Enfield, Illinois claimed to have seen a strange creature wandering around their yard. Even the two claimed that this scary creature wanted to enter the house. Henry McDaniel, the father of the two, soon attributed this horror story to their childhood imagination and did not take the story very seriously. But he changed his mind later that night. McDaniel grabbed a gun and a flashlight to take a look outside the house after he was woken up by strange screeching noises. There, between two rose bushes, he saw a creature that he said had an, almost human-like, body. So, it soon became clear to McDaniel that his children were right. He later told a reporter, "It had 3 legs, 1 body and 2 short arms, and 2 pink eyes the size of flashlights." McDaniel claimed that this creature came to Earth from another planet. McDaniel said he fired 4 shots and was sure at least one hit the creature. This also caused this scary animal to escape from the side of the railway embankment. According to McDaniel, the animal then let out a roar similar to a wild cat. McDaniel was stunned when he saw the animal that could jump from a 25-meter hill in 3 steps. The police officers who arrived at the scene later found the animal's claw marks on the net door and its footprints in the yard. The point is that the Enfield Monster's footprint was similar to that of a dog, but it had 6 claws. However, no other clues to the presence of an unusual entity were found at McDaniel's home. McDaniel's story later made headlines in the local newspaper, the Reading Eagle, but other than that, most people apparently didn't believe it. Even a 10-year-old neighbor boy who had previously claimed to have seen the creature later admitted that he fabricated his story to frame the McDaniels. McDaniel reported the sighting of this unknown monster to the local police twice more, but finally decided not to have anything to do with the police department after being threatened with imprisonment. Apparently, no one believed the story of the terrible creature that he and his children had seen. But McDaniel stubbornly insisted on his claim. He even said in an interview that this creature probably came from another planet. McDaniel said about this, "If they find that creature, they will definitely find more than one specimen. I can also say that this creature is definitely not from our planet." After McDaniel, the claims of other eyewitnesses were also heard. Even after this incident, monster hunters rushed to the city of Enfield and at least 5 men were arrested after shooting shots in the area and even allegedly taking pictures of this creature. However, despite the many conflicting claims and reports that came out in the years after this incident, the truth about the Enfield Monster is still shrouded in mystery and no one knows anything about it. The horror story of Saved by the Bell, is one of the practical terms of the English language, which is usually used to describe finding a solution at the last moment or escaping from a predicament at the 90-minute. But this seemingly simple term has an incredibly frightening background. The origin of the term is related to the disease catalepsy, a disease in which a person suffers from an uncontrollable condition involving severe muscle stiffness. This disease is also often associated with catatonic attacks, movement disorders. Although this disease is well known today, in the past there was no proper understanding of this complicated condition, and for this reason, many people were buried wrongly. After the newspaper and press reports of these tragic events, writers like Edgar Allan Poe started to create horrible stories with this theme. The frequency of confusing cataleptic patients with the dead was such that doctors and cemetery officials used different solutions. Although these solutions later fueled new horrors. One of these scary solutions was a hospital for the dead. In these hospitals, the bodies of patients suspected of catalepsy were observed for a few days to ensure the death of the person. If the patient came out of his temporary paralysis, they usually welcomed him in the hospital with food, wine and cigarettes. True horror stories of Hotel del Salto, Suicide Palace. Thrill seekers traveling to Colombia are likely to be intrigued by the true horror stories surrounding the Hotel del Salto, an old hotel turned museum and considered by many to be one of the most haunted places in Colombia. The Hotel del Salto, which translates to Hotel Jump in Spanish, has apparently been haunted since it was first established as a lavish mansion in 1923. The architect named Carlos Arturo Tapias designed this mansion, which was clearly inspired by the aesthetic elements of French-style architecture. The special location of this magnificent palace overlooking the beautiful Tequendama waterfall gave it a magical view, but according to some claims, this waterfall may be the source of the palace's conquest. The beautiful Del Salto mansion has always been the scene of lavish parties and became a popular hotel by 1928. It was after this that terrible tragedies began. Hotel customers threw themselves out of the windows for mysterious reasons and lost their lives. Also, at least one heartbreaking murder has occurred in this hotel. One of the guests of the hotel, who was a young nobleman, was murdered with a knife in one of the rooms, and the murderer even splashed his blood on the walls. Meanwhile, guests at the infamous Hotel del Salto have claimed to have encountered ghosts around the hotel at night, including some who claimed to have seen the ghost of the young nobleman himself. Some local legends say that Tequendama Falls is where many of the early Muisca people escaped from the Spanish colonialists by jumping off a cliff centuries ago. Although according to these legends, the people of Muisca became eagles after jumping and survived death, but the Muiscas who lost their lives in that incident later captured this spot. So that now, years after the hotel was closed in the 1990s, true horror stories about the hotel are still being heard. Some claim to still hear terrifying screams from inside this abandoned hotel. In addition to this, the continuous landslide and the accumulation of mud on the road leading to the hotel and the stench that can be smelled from the polluted waters of the river are still believed by some to be the reason for the existence of supernatural activities at this point. Today, Hotel del Salto has become a very beautiful cultural museum. Curious visitors can visit the Hotel del Salto until 5 p.m. at the latest, just before the haunted house is discovered. The scary story of Operation Wandering Ghosts. If you're going to look for a more effective way to defeat enemy soldiers in war than lethal weapons, it's undoubtedly psychological terror. This is exactly the same method used by U.S. forces during the Vietnam War. In the culture of the Vietnamese people, a proper burial of the deceased in his hometown allows his soul to go to its destination in the afterlife with satisfaction. But if this is not the case, according to the Vietnamese, the individual's soul will try to find its birthplace, and thus, it will not take long to become a wandering soul. The American forces in the Vietnam War knew about this belief of the people and used it as a tactic to create terror among the enemy soldiers. Knowing that many Vietnamese people were worried about soldiers dying away from their homes, American forces used a psychological tactic called Operation Wandering Ghosts. The U.S. Army's 6th Psychic Operations Battalion had recorded the terrifying tapes, which they broadcast over huge loudspeakers over the jungles of Vietnam. For many Vietnamese soldiers, there was nothing more terrifying than hearing the gut-wrenching screams of ghosts wandering in the darkness far from their homeland. The dreaded tactic was inspired by World War II, Ghost Army Tactics, a unit of mock tanks and personnel carriers that staged a show to fool German intelligence into showing that the Allies had superior forces. Many Vietnamese soldiers truly believed the terrifying messages broadcast on the battlefields, imagining that their fallen comrades now roamed among them in awe of lost spirits. Many of the ghost tapes were made by South Vietnamese forces, allies of the Americans. In these tapes, soldiers were asked to stop fighting. One of these messages read, "My friends, I'm back to inform you that I'm dead. Yes, I'm dead. Be careful not to harm me. Comrades, go home before it's too late." These tapes were so well prepared and convincing that hundreds of people fled the battlefields and took refuge in the mountains. Of course, not all Vietnamese soldiers were deceived by the Americans. But in both cases, this psychological operation was effective. Because the remaining soldiers were also furiously shooting towards these eerie sounds, only to be targeted by the enemy's bullets in a fraction of a second. The horror story of sinister phone numbers. There are many superstitions about unlucky numbers. In the meantime, a phone number issued by a telecommunications company in Bulgaria appears to be one of the most famous cases of odd numbers in modern history. Apparently, this phone number has caused the death of at least 3 of its owners. Whether these events are accidental or not, since then the mobile phone number 0888-888-888 has been tied to the death and misfortune of its owners. The first victim of this number was Vladimir Grashnov, the former CEO of the mobile phone company Mobiltel. He died of cancer in 2001 at the age of 48. There have been many rumors surrounding Grashnov's death, including that he was slowly poisoned by a competitor. 2 years later, the infamous phone number claimed another victim's life. This time it was the turn of Konstantin Dimitrov, the head of the Bulgarian mafia. He was killed by several bullets while he was having dinner with his lover. Dimitrov was 31 years old when he died. The Bulgarian police department believes that his death was caused by a rival smuggler. The third and last victim of this fateful issue was Konstantin Dishlev. Dishlev was also killed in 2005 while eating in an Indian restaurant. Dishlev, like the previous owner of the phone number, had connections with the criminal underworld. You'd probably think that these high-profile victims would have died even without that pesky phone number, especially those involved in drug trafficking. But the fact that all the owners of the phone number died in a 5-year period was enough for the Bulgarian telecommunications company to disable the number forever.